He secretly had a key made for his assistant, a key to their home, a sanctuary he would soon desecrate. He thought his wife, Amelia, would endure anything, a quiet fixture in the life he was building. So he made the key for his young, beautiful assistant, planning to bring her into the apartment that was once their sanctuary. He never imagined that just one night later, his wife would quietly take their son and leave, leaving behind an empty home and a note of just 5 chillingly polite words. "Thank you for everything. I'm gone." He called until his voice was raw, but no one answered. He searched everywhere, but they were gone. It wasn't until he clutched a pair of soft slippers, still holding the faint scent of his wife, that he finally understood. The woman who had waited up for him every night had vanished from his life forever. Amelia Ross woke in the middle of the night, a habit born of unconscious anxiety. Her hand drifted to the other side of the king-sized bed, meeting only the cold, empty space on the premium mattress. The vast master bedroom was shrouded in an oppressive darkness, pierced only by the glow of the Manhattan skyline, filtering through a gap in the blackout curtains, painting lifeless, ghostly streaks on the hardwood floor. The tick-tock of the designer clock on the wall was a dry, steady beat, punctuated by the soft breathing of their son, Mason, sleeping soundly in the adjacent room. It had been a week since Ethan Cole had come home after midnight, and some nights he hadn't come home at all. He said the company had a major project, that he needed to work overtime, that he had to entertain clients. Every excuse sounded plausible. He was the CEO of a major holding company. Being busy was part of the job. But in Amelia's heart, a quiet unease grew like an invisible vine, tightening its grip each day. She wasn't the suspicious type, not the controlling wife. In their 5 years of marriage, she had placed her complete trust in Ethan, never once checking his phone or succumbing to baseless jealousy. She had always believed the foundation of a marriage was trust and respect. But now, her instincts, the instincts of a wife, of a woman who knew her husband's every glance and gesture, were screaming in silent desperation. Ethan had changed. His gaze would often shift away when she asked about his day. The hugs he gave when he came home no longer held their familiar warmth. They were perfunctory, a gesture performed out of obligation. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now always placed screen down, as if hiding a secret. Worst of all was the scent. The dress shirts he shed each night no longer carried the crisp, cedarwood cologne she had carefully chosen for him. Instead, they were tainted with a strange perfume, cloyingly sweet and persistent, the scent of another woman. The first time she smelled it, she told herself it was from a female colleague or client. But the second time, the third, and then almost every day, her self-assurances became weak and ridiculous. Family dinners became a rarity. Conversations about their son, about their lives, faded. He came home only to sleep and left at the crack of dawn, as if fleeing the very home he had built. Even with Mason, the child he had once doted on, the son he had proudly shown off to the world, all the boy received now was a fleeting, distracted pat on the head before Ethan turned away. Amelia sat up quietly, smoothing the corner of the duvet on his side of the bed, a space so pristine it looked as if no one had ever slept there. Her eyes were heavy, not from sleepiness, but from the unnamed thoughts tormenting her. Something was rotting, collapsing from within their marriage, something she didn't have the courage to name. She had once believed that if she was patient enough, gentle enough, understanding enough, their marriage would always be safe. But a prolonged silence can be more terrifying than a fiery argument. It erodes love, making people accustomed to not speaking, not asking, not sharing. It turns two people who once shared a bed into strangers living under the same roof. She walked barefoot across the cool wooden floor to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. Outside, New York City was sleepless. Skyscrapers blazed with light, and the streams of traffic flowed like endless rivers of fire. This city was too large, too dazzling, a place where it was easy to get lost, to be swept away by fleeting temptations. She remembered when they were first in love, when Ethan was just a junior executive with big dreams. He had once driven over an hour through a rainstorm just to bring her a cup of artisan hot chocolate she had idly mentioned craving. He had stayed up all night just to listen to her tell rambling stories about her day. He had held her hand, his eyes gentle and resolute, and said, "Amy, all I'll ever need in this life is you and a home to share." Now he had it all: a thriving career, a luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park, a family many dreamed of, but it seemed he had forgotten what he once considered most important. Those small, warm moments had become distant memories, covered by the dust of time and ambition. Amelia placed a hand on her chest, where her heart beat steadily, but felt heavy, aching. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but her intuition told her a storm was gathering, and she was about to face a truth that both her heart and mind had refused to believe. She tiptoed into her son's room. Mason was fast asleep, one arm wrapped around a small teddy bear, the corner of his mouth curved up in a gentle smile. His innocent, peaceful face was her only source of strength now. She leaned down and placed a soft kiss on his forehead, whispering like a vow, "Mason, no matter what happens, Mommy will always be here for you." She sat on the edge of his bed, watching him sleep. Out there, the world of adults was complicated and filled with cruel changes. At least here, in this small room, she still had a pure and peaceful world to protect. But for how much longer? The strongest wall of their family, her son's father, seemed to have already abandoned his post. She sat there for a long time, until her limbs grew numb and the darkness outside began to fade, giving way to the first light of dawn. Another night had passed in waiting and confusion. Ethan still hadn't come home. Amelia knew her silence couldn't last forever. Sooner or later, she would have to choose. Either continue to turn a blind eye, living in the hollow shell of a marriage, or bravely uncover the truth and risk losing everything. Amelia's birthday arrived on a late autumn afternoon. The sun was pale, the breeze was gentle, and her heart felt strangely vast and empty. She had received congratulatory messages from old friends since the morning. A few close friends had even sent flowers and gifts to the apartment. Her parents, back in their small Midwestern hometown, had called early, fussing over her. But the one person she longed to hear from remained silent. Not a text, not a call. Ethan, her husband, seemed to have completely forgotten what day it was. She told herself not to be the kind of woman who just sits around waiting for a birthday wish from her husband. She busied herself cleaning the apartment, went to the gourmet market for fresh ingredients, and prepared a simple dinner. Not a lavish party, just a warm meal. She made the perfectly seared steak he loved, the creamy mac and cheese Mason adored, and a fresh garden salad. She had even bought a small chocolate hazelnut cake, planning to let Mason write "Happy Birthday, Mom" on it. She wasn't hoping for much, truly. Just for Ethan to come home tonight, for the three of them to sit together, eat a meal, and blow out the candles. That would have been the most perfect birthday gift. A small, faint flicker of hope still burned within her. Maybe he was pretending to forget to surprise her? The old Ethan used to do romantic things like that. 6 p.m. She set the food on the dining table. 7 p.m., she called him. It went straight to voicemail. 7:30 p.m. Still no answer. Amelia started to feel a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach, but she forced a smile so Mason wouldn't notice. The little boy ran out of his room, his face alight with excitement. "Mommy, is Dad coming home soon? I'm so hungry." "He'll be home soon, sweetie." "He's probably just stuck in traffic," she said, gently coaxing him. "Go play for a little while longer, okay?" At 8 p.m., when the food on the table had gone cold, her phone buzzed. It was a text message. Her heart skipped a beat as she rushed to open it. The screen lit up with Ethan's cold, impersonal words. Asterisk. Urgent meeting came up. Can't make it for dinner. You and Mason eat first. Asterisk. That was it. One short sentence. No further explanation, no apology, and of course, no mention of her birthday. Amelia stared at the message, her hand trembling slightly. Disappointment washed over her like a torrent of icy water, extinguishing the last fragile embers of hope. She didn't rage, she didn't cry. She just felt a quiet sadness spread through her body, a feeling of being forgotten in her own life. "Mommy, it's your birthday! Make a wish!" Mason came running out, holding a small gift clumsily wrapped in construction paper. He was beaming, his big, bright eyes sparkling as he held out a crayon drawing. In the picture, 3 stick figures held hands under a smiling sun next to a giant birthday cake. Amelia knelt and pulled her son into a tight hug. She inhaled the sweet, milky scent of his hair, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I wish my Mason will always be healthy, always happy, and always by my side." Her voice caught, and she couldn't say another word. The candles on the small cake were lit, their faint light trembling in the quiet space. Mason clapped his hands and sang "Happy Birthday." The child's clear voice mingled with the terrifying silence of the adults. One person was missing, one wish was missing, one loving glance was missing. But she had to keep smiling, so her son wouldn't see the sorrow welling up in her eyes. She didn't know how she managed to cut the cake or how she managed to eat. All she knew was that her sense of taste was completely numb. The tender steak, the rich mac and cheese, it was all flavorless. The only sounds were her son's cheerful chatter and the echo of her own loneliness. Night fell quickly. After putting Mason to bed, Amelia stepped out onto the balcony. The city was still vibrant, ablaze with lights, but to her, this birthday felt like a cruel milestone, signaling that something had truly shattered, even if no one had officially said so. There was no anger, no tears, just a silence that reached the very depths of her heart. Amelia knew this forgetfulness wasn't just an oversight. It wasn't because he was too busy. It was the inevitable consequence of a heart that was no longer in its old place. And the thing that hurt her most wasn't that Ethan didn't remember his wife's birthday, but that he no longer wanted times to remember. For a man in love with someone else, everything about his wife, memories, important dates, becomes a burden not worth bearing. She stood there, letting the cold night wind of New York wash over her, but it couldn't cool the dull fire of pain burning in her chest. After that silent birthday, Amelia stopped making excuses for him. The wall of patience she had painstakingly built over the past few months had developed cracks that could never be repaired. Her intuition, that vague but persistent feeling, was now too clear to ignore. Ethan wasn't changing because of work, pressure, or life stresses. He was changing because someone else was in his heart. She began to observe him more closely, no longer with the loving eyes of a wife waiting for her husband to come home, but with the weary gaze of an analyst whose hope was draining away. In the mornings, he would rush out without eating the breakfast she'd prepared. Late at night, the strange perfume still lingered on his collar and on the seat of his car. Sometimes, she would even see a faint lipstick smudge on his white shirt, a bright, garish red, completely different from the muted, earthy tones she always wore. Amelia had never believed a man could change so easily just because of a third person. She had naively thought that if she gave enough love and forgiveness, she could hold on to the heart of the man she chose to marry. Now, she understood the bitter truth. You can't hold on to something when a person has already decided to leave. She didn't speak up, didn't question him, didn't confront him, not because she was weak, but because she understood that words were meaningless now. If a man still loves his wife, he will find a way to save his family. If he no longer loves her, any question is just another form of self-torture, turning her into a pathetic, pitiful woman in the eyes of the man who betrayed her. A few days after her birthday, on a rare, quiet afternoon, Amelia decided to deep clean the entire apartment, starting with Ethan's home office, a place she seldom entered. She wanted to use the busyness of her hands to fill the gaping void in her mind. While organizing a stack of documents on his desk, she saw the suit jacket he had worn on her birthday, tossed carelessly over the back of his chair. Out of habit, she picked it up to check the pockets before sending it to the dry cleaners. Her hand froze when she felt a stiff piece of paper inside the breast pocket. She slowly pulled it out. It was a receipt. Her eyes narrowed, reading each sharply printed line. Asterisk Aura Asterisk, a luxurious and romantic French restaurant on the Hudson, famous for its panoramic views of the city at night. The date on the receipt was her birthday. The total amount was astronomical, enough for a lavish dinner for two. Amelia's heart felt as if it were being squeezed in a vice. Asterisk Aura Asterisk. This was the place Ethan had promised to take her for their 5th wedding anniversary. But he had canceled, claiming he had an unavoidable last-minute business trip. And now, he had gone there with someone else, on his own wife's birthday. The deception was so blatant, the betrayal so cruel. This was no longer a vague suspicion. This was clear, irrefutable proof. A thin piece of paper that felt as heavy as lead, crushing the last remnants of her hope. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. He looked tired, loosening his tie as he sat down on the sofa. Amelia maintained her composure. She cooked dinner, called their son to the table. Everything proceeded as normal, but the air in the apartment was as heavy as stone. After Mason was in bed, Amelia walked into the living room. Without a word, she calmly placed the receipt on the glass coffee table in front of Ethan, right next to the files he was reviewing. He looked up, his eyes landing on the receipt. His pupils contracted for a fleeting moment, a flash of panic that he quickly extinguished. He cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. "Oh, this." Amelia just stared at him silently, waiting for an explanation. He picked up the receipt, turning it over in his hands, as if examining something perfectly ordinary. "I had to entertain a very important client that day. They're from France, and they specifically requested this place." The lie came out smoothly, but he couldn't meet her eyes. Amelia felt a bitter taste spread in her mouth. Her voice was even but icy. A client so important you had to turn off your phone? So important you couldn't answer a single text from your wife? Her calmness seemed to unnerve him. His face tensed, and his voice took on an edge of annoyance and defensiveness. "Amelia, don't overthink things. My work has been incredibly stressful lately. You wouldn't understand. Don't make things more complicated." With that, he stood up, grabbed his files, and walked straight into the bedroom, leaving her alone with the empty space and the discarded receipt on the table. Asterisk. You wouldn't understand. Asterisk. She let out a laugh, a sound more desolate than a sob. That was right. She couldn't understand how the man who had promised to protect her for a lifetime could now use such clumsy lies to cover up his betrayal. He didn't even bother to come up with a more sophisticated excuse. Did he think she was that naive, that easy to fool? The short conversation was over. He had single-handedly built a tall, thick wall between them, a wall of deceit and indifference. Amelia sat motionless on the sofa for a long time, staring at the receipt. It was a silent indictment, testifying to the decay of the marriage she had once poured her heart into. The days following the failed confrontation about the receipt were a stretch of suffocating silence. Amelia no longer tried to start conversations, no longer asked about his day. Ethan seemed content with that arrangement. He left early and came home late. They passed each other in their own home like two ships in the night. She lived like a pre-programmed machine. Wake Mason, prepare breakfast, take him to school, pick him up, cook dinner, clean. All her emotions seemed to have been drained away, leaving only an exhausted body trying to function. But she knew she couldn't live like this forever. Living in a lie was a slow-acting poison, destroying not only her but also affecting Mason. He was a sensitive child. Despite her best efforts to act normal, her son sensed the tension in the family. One evening, as she was reading a story to Mason, he suddenly looked up, his clear eyes meeting hers, and asked a question that tore her heart to pieces. "Mommy, does Daddy not love you anymore?" Her son's innocent question was the final blow, shattering her endurance. She couldn't let her son grow up in a fake environment devoid of love. She couldn't let this silence and deceit poison his pure soul. For her own dignity, and more importantly, for Mason's future, she had to act. She decided she needed undeniable proof, something she had to witness with her own eyes. Not to fight for him or win him back, her heart was already dead. She needed the cruelest, clearest truth so she could leave without any lingering regret or doubt. She needed one final, clean cut to sever this rotten bond completely. The opportunity came on a Friday afternoon. She was in the living room watching Mason play with his Legos when Ethan took a phone call. He stepped out onto the balcony but must have thought she wasn't paying attention because he didn't slide the glass door shut. His voice was low, but in the quiet apartment, she could still make out the key words. "All right, Jessica, 4 p.m. on Saturday then. Come straight to my office. Yeah, no one will be at the company then. See you, Jessica." Jessica Vance, his executive assistant. The name was like a key, unlocking all of her suspicions. All the scattered pieces suddenly clicked together, forming a complete and disgusting picture of an affair. Her heart felt like it had been plunged into a pit of ice, numb and frozen, but her mind, in contrast, was strangely clear. She knew what she had to do. Throughout the afternoon, she began to make her plans. She called her best friend Chloe and told her she was bringing Mason over for a sleepover that weekend. That evening, when Ethan got home, she casually told him her plan. "I'm taking Mason to Chloe's this weekend. The kids haven't seen each other in a while." He looked up from his iPad, a flicker of relief and pleasure in his eyes that he couldn't quite hide. "Yeah, that's a good idea. You should get out and relax." His easy agreement and his look of relief only confirmed her suspicions. He was happy she and their son would be gone. He thought he would have the freedom to be with his mistress. He had no idea he was handing her a ticket to the truth and a ticket out of his life forever. Saturday arrived, a fateful day. The New York sky was as gloomy as her heart. She packed a small bag for Mason, dropped him off at her friend's house, and gave him a dozen instructions. Chloe looked at her pale face with concern. "Amy, are you okay? You look exhausted." She forced a weak smile. "I'm fine. Just a little sleep-deprived lately. I'll pick Mason up tomorrow." After leaving her friend's place, she hailed a cab and gave an address in the financial district. During the entire ride, she said nothing, just stared out the window. The bustling crowds, the honking traffic, she felt completely detached, like a ghost drifting through a world that no longer belonged to her. Her hands were cold, her stomach was in knots, but her will was firm. The taxi stopped in front of the gleaming skyscraper that housed the headquarters of Cole Holdings. She looked up at the magnificent structure of glass and steel. This was his pride, the kingdom he had built. But today, it was about to become the tomb of her marriage. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. There was no turning back now. She smoothed her clothes and, with steps that felt both steady and heavy, walked into the building's opulent lobby. Her reflection in the polished marble floor looked foreign and desolate. Amelia took the executive elevator to the top floor of the building. The sleek, mirrored interior reflected the image of a woman with a deathly pale face but terrifyingly determined eyes. The entire executive floor was deserted on a Saturday afternoon, as silent as a tomb. The plush carpet swallowed the sound of her footsteps. Her heart hammered against her ribs, so hard she felt it might burst. She stopped in front of the heavy, imposing wooden door of the CEO's office. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly ajar, leaving a thin crack. They must have been too confident, assuming no one would ever come here at this hour. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hand, cold as ice, trembling as she gently pushed the door. It swung open without a sound, and the scene inside immediately seared itself into her vision. A scene no wife in the world should ever have to witness. Ethan was sitting in his powerful leather executive chair, but he wasn't alone. Jessica Vance, his young, beautiful assistant, was perched gracefully in his lap. She was wearing a slinky, red silk dress that hugged her curves, her arms wrapped around his neck in a blatantly seductive manner. They were laughing together, their faces close, their eyes holding none of the professional distance of a boss and his subordinate. Jessica's coquettish voice, high-pitched and grating, echoed in the quiet office. "Ethan, I've missed you these past few days. Did you miss me?" Amelia heard her husband's low chuckle, the same laugh that had once made her heart flutter, now feeling like 1,000 needles piercing her skin. "Do you even have to ask? I think about you all the time." The words flowed from him effortlessly, as if a wife named Amelia Ross didn't exist anywhere in his world. His hand was resting possessively on Jessica's waist. He leaned in and gave her a long, deep kiss. Amelia stood frozen in the doorway, her hand clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. She couldn't breathe. But strangely, her eyes were dry. Not a single tear fell. There was no sob, no gasp for air. She just stood there silently, an outsider, an unwilling audience to a cheap play starring her own husband. The pain was too immense, too sudden. It was beyond tears, beyond screams. It left her entire body numb, so this was the truth. All her suspicions, her sleepless nights, her attempts to deceive herself, all of it was confirmed by this raw, sordid scene. Her 5-year marriage, the love she had once considered her everything, was nothing but a joke. After only a few seconds, as quietly as she had arrived, she backed away, pulling the door closed as if it had never been opened. She did it so gently, it made no sound. The laughter and playful chatter from behind the door continued, oblivious to her presence. It was as if she had just presided over the funeral of a part of her life. She turned and walked down the endless hallway, each step feeling like she was treading on the shards of her own heart. When she stepped out of the building, she looked up. The gray sky had finally broken, and a cold rain began to fall, soaking her hair and shoulders. She had no umbrella, nor did she have any intention of finding shelter. She just walked, aimlessly, through the rushing crowds on the street. Horns blared, people laughed, faces blurred past her. No one looked twice at the woman who had just witnessed her heart being fatally stabbed. There were no words, no tears, no screams, because this pain was beyond all expression. The rain grew heavier, lashing against her face, washing away the light makeup she had applied to hide her exhaustion. The rainwater mixed with something salty trickling from the corners of her eyes that she didn't even realize was there. She walked for a long time, through countless streets. Memories flooded her mind, their wedding day, the times he held her during rainstorms and made promises, the vows that he would never let her go even if the world fell apart. All of it, was just words from a man who could just as easily whisper the same things to another woman. When she was completely exhausted, she collapsed onto a bench in a deserted park. Her body was soaked and freezing, but no wind, no rain could be colder than the chill spreading from her heart. And in that moment, in the middle of a New York downpour, Amelia knew there was nothing left to hold on to. The only choice left was to let go. That night, Amelia returned to their luxurious penthouse. She was soaked to the bone and as cold as ice, but she felt nothing. She went straight to the bathroom and stood under the shower, letting the hot water cascade over her body. She scrubbed her skin for a long time, as if trying to wash away the filthy memories of the day, to wash away the 5 years of her youth she had misplaced. After her shower, she changed into a simple, comfortable set of pajamas. She didn't cry. She didn't smash anything. The violent storm of emotions had passed, leaving in its wake a terrifying calm, the calm of a person whose heart had completely died. She began to pack. She went to Mason's room first. She gently folded his small clothes, carefully wrapped his favorite storybooks, and gathered his Lego sets into a box. Every item was tied to a memory, a happy moment between mother and son. But looking at them now, all she felt was a dull ache. She packed everything into one large suitcase. Then, she returned to their master bedroom. She opened the enormous walk-in closet. One side was filled with Ethan's expensive, perfectly pressed suits. The other side was her world, designer dresses, luxury handbags he had bought for her. She looked at them and smiled a self-mocking smile. He had given her a life of material comfort, but had taken away the most precious things, trust and love. She didn't touch any of it. She packed only a few sets of everyday clothes, some essential personal items, and most importantly, her identification, and a savings account that was in her name alone. Everything fit into one small suitcase. In less than an hour, she had erased all traces of herself from the apartment. She stood in the middle of the living room, a space that had once echoed with her child's laughter, hosted warm birthday parties, and displayed happy family photos. Now, in her eyes, it was just cold and empty. She walked to the wall of photos and took down the largest one, their wedding portrait. In the photo, she was wearing a pristine white gown, and he was looking at her with an adoring gaze. She silently placed it face down on a table. On Ethan's desk, she left an envelope. Inside wasn't a divorce petition or a long, accusatory letter. It was just a single sheet of paper, with a few lines written in her elegant but firm handwriting. Asterisk, thank you for everything. I'm gone. Asterisk. She didn't sign her name. She knew Ethan would understand. This polite, cold thank you was the most painful farewell of all. The next morning, while the city was still asleep, she woke Mason. He rubbed his eyes, his voice sleepy. "Mommy, where are we going so early?" Amelia knelt, her smile gentle and, for the first time in a long time, genuine. "We're moving to a new house, sweetie. We're going to start a new life. Do you like that?" He didn't fully understand her words, but he felt his mother's hand holding his tightly, saw the calm warmth in her eyes, and nodded. For a child, as long as Mom was there, anywhere was home. She pulled the 2 suitcases, holding her son's hand, and quietly left the penthouse. She didn't look back. She knew that some places, even if they were once called home, could never be called home again once they were tainted by betrayal. A taxi dropped them off in front of a modest, older apartment building in a quiet neighborhood in Queens, a place she had secretly found and rented a while ago. No one knew she was moving. A wife had chosen to leave without a scene, without demanding anything, taking with her only a heart that had once loved completely and was now completely empty. When she opened the door to the new apartment, a small, simple, but clean space was revealed. Morning light streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. There was no luxury furniture, no view of the Manhattan skyline, but it felt safe. This was where she and her son would start over. It would be difficult, but at least it would be a beginning free from lies. Ethan Cole returned home on Sunday evening in a reasonably good mood. With Amelia and Mason gone for the weekend, he'd had 2 full days of freedom with Jessica Vance. She was sweet, seductive, and knew how to make him happy, a stark contrast to Amelia's recent silence and coldness. He felt a secret sense of relief, a twinge of guilt mixed with a thrill of excitement. He opened the door to the apartment. It was dark and silent. He flipped on the lights. The sudden quiet was unsettling. "Amelia?" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. He frowned, a flicker of annoyance passing through him. Why wasn't she back yet with their son? As much as he'd grown tired of the tedium at home, he was used to having someone there, waiting. Her absence now felt strangely irritating. He loosened his tie and walked into the living room. Everything was unnaturally tidy, too tidy. His eyes fell on the glass coffee table. Their wedding portrait, the largest and most beautiful one, was lying face down. A chill ran down his spine. Why would she do that? Some childish fit of pique? A sense of foreboding washed over him, and he strode quickly towards the master bedroom. He flipped the light switch, and the harsh white light flooded the room. The bed was perfectly made. He walked to the closet, his heart beginning to pound. He pulled open the doors to Amelia's side. It was empty. All of her clothes, the designer dresses, the casual outfits, were gone. He stood stunned, his mind blank, unable to believe what he was seeing. He staggered back a few steps and then rushed to Mason's room. The same scene repeated itself. His son's closet was nearly empty, his favorite toys and books gone from the shelves. The room felt like a hollow, soulless shell. His throat was dry. Panic began to rise, squeezing his chest. He ran like a madman back to his office, the room where he spent more time than the bedroom. And then he saw it. On his polished mahogany desk, placed neatly on top of a stack of important documents, was a white envelope. His hands trembled so badly he could barely pick it up. He tore it open violently. Inside was a small piece of paper, a few lines in her neat, elegant handwriting. Asterisk. Thank you for everything. I'm gone. Asterisk. The flimsy piece of paper fell from his numb fingers. Asterisk. Thank you. I'm gone. Asterisk. No accusations, no questions, no screaming or anger. Just a polite, cruel finality. That very calmness was more suffocating than any indictment. Amelia! He roared her name into the void, but the only reply was the dead silence of a home that had lost its warmth. He snatched his phone, his fumbling fingers dialing her number. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again. The cold, automated voice was like a hammer blow to his head. He called again and again and again. Always the same hateful reply. She had turned off her phone or thrown away the SIM card. He frantically dialed Chloe, Amelia's best friend. After a few rings, she picked up. Hello? Chloe, it's me, Ethan. His voice was tense and urgent. Is Amelia with you? Did she tell you where she was going? There was a pause on the other end, then Chloe's voice, hesitant. No. Amelia picked Mason up early Sunday morning. She said she was going home. Ethan, did something happen? She didn't seem okay. He hung up without answering. The blood in his veins felt like it had turned to ice. She had lied. She had planned everything. She had deceived him perfectly. He called her parents. They were just as surprised, saying Amelia hadn't called or given any notice that she was coming for a visit. It was only then that the brutal truth became clear. She had left him. She had truly, actually taken their son and walked out of his life without a word. Ethan stumbled through the apartment, a space that now felt vast and cold as a tomb. He opened the jewelry box on her vanity. All the expensive pieces he had bought her were still there, the diamond ring, the necklaces, the watches. She hadn't taken a single thing that belonged to him. She had left with nothing but their son. He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his head in his hands. The confidence, the arrogance of a successful man completely crumbled. What had he been thinking? That she would just stay there forever, silently enduring his neglect? That she was weak and couldn't live without him? He had been wrong, so horribly, catastrophically wrong. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole felt loss, a loss so immense it made the empire he was so proud of feel meaningless. He had lost his family. The days after Amelia left were a long, agonizing blur for Ethan Cole. The luxurious penthouse, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a prison. He lived like a ghost in his own home. He couldn't sleep. Every night, he would sit on the sofa in the dark living room, staring at his phone, dialing a number that would never answer. The automated number, not in service message, became the most familiar sound in his life. He sent hundreds of texts, from desperate pleas and belated apologies to threats born of despair. All of it was like throwing stones into the ocean, not a single reply. Every corner of the house bore her trace. The orchid she tended to on the console table had started to wilt. The pair of plush slippers she wore around the house were still neatly placed by the door. He picked one up. The soft fabric seemed to retain the warmth and shape of her foot. The scent of her floral shampoo still lingered in the bathroom. These small, everyday details he had never noticed before were now as sharp as knives, cutting into him. His mind replayed the events of the past few months with painful clarity. He remembered how the light in Amelia's eyes had gradually dimmed each time he came home late. He remembered her forced smile when he used work as an excuse to skip family dinners. He remembered his cold, thoughtless text on her birthday. He remembered her terrifyingly calm expression as she placed the restaurant receipt in front of him. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her patience for weakness. He had been too arrogant, too confident that she would never dare to leave him, to leave the comfortable life he provided. He had used her forgiveness as an excuse for his own selfishness. Now he realized how foolish he had been. He had pushed away the woman who loved him most with his own hands. At the office, he couldn't focus. He became irritable and short-tempered. In meetings, he was frequently distracted, making rash decisions that stunned his subordinates. The Cole Holdings empire he took such pride in was showing its first signs of instability, all because its leader had lost his balance. Jessica Vance, of course, noticed the change in him. She tried to get close, to comfort him. One afternoon, she brought coffee into his office, her voice sweet. "Ethan, don't be sad anymore. She's gone, but in a way, it's a release for you. You're free now." Ethan, who was staring blankly at a financial report, heard her words and snapped his head up. His eyes were as sharp as daggers. "A release?" He scoffed, a bitter, self-loathing smile on his face. "What would you know about it?" He shot up from his chair, violently shaking her hand off his arm. "This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have left. Get out." Jessica was stunned, her face paling at his rage. It was the first time he had ever treated her this way. She left in a huff, and he sank back into his chair, disgusted with himself. He started seeing his mistress in a new light. The novelty and allure had vanished, replaced by a shallow, troublesome woman. He realized their affair was just a reckless game, a foolish infatuation, and the price was his entire family. What tormented him most was the silence. No more of Mason's cheerful laughter, no more Daddy. When he opened the door, no more of Amelia's gentle, "You're home." The quiet he had once craved, to be left undisturbed, had now become the most excruciating form of torture. One night, he found himself wandering into Mason's room. It was empty and cold. He sat on the floor and noticed a small toy car his son had left under the bed. He picked it up, clutching it in his palm. And then, the arrogant man who had never shed a tear in the face of any hardship finally broke. He buried his head in his knees, his broad shoulders shaking violently. Gut-wrenching sobs of pain and regret echoed in the empty room. He had lost the most precious treasure of his life. When Amelia left, Jessica Vance thought she had won. She had eliminated the biggest obstacle, and the position of Mrs. Cole was just a matter of time. She dreamed of a life of luxury, of being admired as the mistress of the Cole empire. But she quickly realized she had made one fatal miscalculation: Ethan Cole's heart. For the first few weeks, she patiently played the role of the understanding lover, gently comforting him. But as Ethan sank deeper into his misery and guilt, Jessica's patience wore thin, replaced by impatience and frustration. What was he mourning? A boring, old-fashioned wife? She started to act more decisively. She began showing up at his penthouse unannounced, bringing her personal belongings, trying to rearrange the decor to her liking, as if staking her claim. "Ethan, this place is so cold. Why don't I move in and take care of you?" "You've gotten so thin lately," she cooed, stroking his arm. Ethan pulled his arm away, his eyes cold. "That won't be necessary. I don't like strangers in my home." The word stranger was a slap in the face, but Jessica forced a smile. She started asking about company business, about shareholders, about projects she was never privy to before. Her interest was not about sharing his burden, but a calculated probing. Her actions constantly reminded Ethan of Amelia, painfully so. Amelia never asked how much money he made, never demanded he buy her things. She was always quietly in the background, supporting him unconditionally, providing him with a peaceful haven. Amelia's purity and lack of interest in his wealth now stood in stark contrast to Jessica's blatant materialism. The infatuation he once felt for her curdled into disgust. The final straw came late one evening. Ethan was drinking alone in the dark living room when the front door suddenly opened. Jessica walked in. She had secretly had her own key made. She was wearing a flimsy silk nightgown. Her makeup was flawless, and her heavy perfume assaulted his senses. She approached, sat beside him, and tried to lean against him. "Ethan, stop drinking. Look at yourself. All this over a woman who walked out on you. Is she really worth it?" Hearing the phrase "a woman," Ethan laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. He slammed his glass down on the table and turned to her, his eyes dangerously cold. "She is not a woman. She is my wife." Jessica froze, her jealousy and anger finally boiling over. Her voice became shrill. "Wife? A wife who would cruelly take her son and leave without a word? Wake up, Ethan. I'm the one who's here for you now. I'm the one who endured the humiliation of being your secret lover. I'm the one who truly loves you. Love me?" Ethan laughed even louder, a laugh filled with utter contempt. "Do you love me? Or do you love my money? The title of Mrs. Cole? Amelia was with me when I was just a broke junior executive with nothing to my name. What have you done, other than use dirty tricks to destroy someone else's family?" Jessica's beautiful face twisted in a snarl. "Dirty tricks? Ethan Cole, don't you dare pretend to be so noble. If you weren't so bored with your tedious marriage, if you hadn't come on to me yourself, would I have even had a chance?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, bitterly. "I was a fool. I was a bastard. But now, the dream is over." He stood up and pointed to the door, his voice low but filled with an authority that allowed no argument. "Get out. Take all your things and get out of my life. Now." You're kicking me out?" Jessica couldn't believe it. "Ethan Cole, you will regret this. Don't think you can just dump me like this," she shrieked. But when she saw his eyes, devoid of any affection and filled only with endless disgust, she knew it was truly over. Furious, she gathered her things, threw a curse over her shoulder, and slammed the door behind her. The apartment was silent again. But this time, the silence didn't torment him. It brought a sliver of peace. The ugly argument had been like an antidote, helping him see the true face of his mistress and the depth of his own stupidity. The fantasy of a passionate, thrilling love affair had shattered completely. All that remained was the naked truth. He had thrown away a priceless diamond for a glittering pebble on the side of the road. His regret was now sharper, clearer, and aimed entirely at his own unforgivable foolishness. While Ethan Cole was drowning in a swamp of regret and collapse, in another part of New York, Amelia Ross was starting her new life. The initial shock and pain had subsided, replaced by the very real concerns of making a living. The apartment she rented was clean but small and old. The plumbing was temperamental, and the neighbors were sometimes noisy. It was a world away from the quiet luxury she was used to. For the first time in 5 years, she had to worry about money, meticulously budgeting every dollar for rent, utilities, food, and Mason's school fees. Her personal savings weren't substantial. They would run out quickly if she didn't find a job. Her biggest worry was Mason. Though he was a well-behaved child, he still had his moments of sadness. He missed his big room full of toys, his friends at his old preschool, and sometimes he would ask about his father. One evening at dinner, Mason suddenly put down his fork and looked up at her with his big, round eyes. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy come visit us? Was I not a good boy? Is he mad at me?" Amelia's heart clenched. She put down her own fork and pulled him into her lap, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, sweetie, of course not. Daddy's not mad at you. He's just very, very busy with work. But he always loves you the most. We have fun here, just the two of us, right? We're going to make this little house the best place in the world." She knew it was a lie, but she had to lie to protect her son's fragile heart. Mason's presence was her only motivation. She could not afford to break down. For her son, she had to be stronger than ever before. She started looking for a job, but it wasn't easy. With a 5-year gap in her resume and a young child to care for, she had almost no competitive edge. She sent out countless applications to design firms, but heard nothing back. The harsh reality was discouraging, but she refused to give up. She opened her old laptop and started looking for freelance design gigs online. At first, they were small, odd jobs, designing a logo for a local shop, creating a flyer, touching up some blueprints for architecture students. The pay was meager, barely enough to cover daily expenses, but it was the first money she had earned herself in years. It gave her a sense of independence and a glimmer of hope. Her life fell into a new rhythm, each day a battle. She would wake up early, make a simple breakfast, and walk Mason to the local public school. Then she would rush home and spend hours glued to her computer. In the afternoon, she would hurry to pick him up, cook dinner, and play with him. After Mason was asleep, she would continue working late into the night. Her body was exhausted, but her spirit had a clear purpose. Sometimes, in the quiet of the late night, when she was alone with the darkness, the loneliness and fear would creep back in. She missed the comfort and security of her old life. She worried about the future, wondering how long she could keep this up. But then she would look at Mason's angelic sleeping face, and her fighting spirit would surge. She had left Ethan to give her son a life free of deceit, and she would do everything in her power to build a better life for them, no matter how hard it was. One night, after finishing a logo design, she looked at her work on the screen. She was tired, but her eyes held a spark of pride and hope. The road ahead was long and difficult, but she believed that as long as she had Mason by her side, she could do anything. 5 years. Not a long time, but long enough to turn a barren plot into a flourishing garden, long enough for a woman to be reborn from the ashes like a magnificent phoenix. In a quiet, upscale corner of Brooklyn, the Sprout Hub, an early education center, stood out with its modern yet friendly architecture, flooded with natural light and greenery. The clear, bright laughter of children filled the air, mingling with soft, melodic music. It felt less like a school and more like a large, warm home. Amelia Ross, dressed in an elegant beige shirt dress, stood quietly observing an art class. Her hair was swept up in a neat bun, her face no longer holding the sorrowful, submissive look of 5 years prior. In its place was a calm confidence, a deep, tempered beauty forged by hardship. Her eyes, watching the children engrossed in their painting, shone with gentleness and patience. No one would guess that this graceful woman was the single mother who had once taken on cheap, odd design jobs to make ends meet. The past 5 years had been a challenging journey. With her small savings and freelance income, she had rented a small storefront and started a drawing class for a few neighborhood kids. Her educational philosophy wasn't about cramming knowledge, but about sparking creativity and nurturing emotional intelligence. She understood that every child was a seed, and it was the adult's job to create the best environment for that seed to grow strong on its own. Word of her dedication and unique methods spread. More and more parents were drawn to her classes. One of them, a successful businesswoman, saw the positive changes in her own child and decided to invest in Amelia's dream. From a small classroom, the Sprout Hub was born, quickly becoming one of the most reputable and sought-after early education centers in New York. Amelia wasn't just a director, she was an inspiration. Many parents, especially mothers, came to her for advice, not just about raising children, but about life. Miss Ross, a young mother with a worried expression, approached her. "My daughter has been so shy lately, she's afraid to speak up in class. I really don't know what to do." Amelia turned, offering a gentle, warm smile. "Mrs. Davis, please don't worry too much. Every child is like a seed. Some sprout quickly in the sun, but others need more time in the soil, gathering strength before they push through. Our job is to be patient, to water them and to trust them, not to anxiously dig them up to see if the roots have grown. Rest assured, at the Sprout Hub, we will walk this path with you and your daughter." Her words had a strange, calming power, making people feel at ease. In the afternoon, after the center closed, a tall, bright boy with shining eyes ran up and hugged her from behind. "Mom, I got the highest score in science class today." It was Mason Cole. The skinny 5-year-old was now a 10-year-old elementary school student, smart, mature, and deeply devoted to his mother. 5 years of Amelia's patient love and guidance had shaped him into a confident, kind, and understanding boy. He rarely asked about his father anymore. In his world, his mother was enough. "That's my boy! You're so brilliant!" Amelia ruffled her son's hair, her eyes sparkling with pride. "I'll treat you to a special dinner tonight." "Yay!" he cheered, then dutifully picked up his backpack and began helping his mom tidy up her office. He was immensely proud of his mother's work. That evening, after Mason was asleep, Amelia stood by the window of their new home, a comfortable, high-rise apartment she had designed herself. It wasn't as large as the old penthouse, but it was cozy and warm. Her life was now stable and fulfilling. Did the shadow of Ethan Cole ever cross her mind in these quiet moments? Yes, but it was now a distant memory, a healed scar that no longer ached. She had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but to free herself from the burdens of the past. She had learned to love herself, to stand on her own 2 feet. She had built a complete and happy world for herself and her son, a beautiful world that didn't need his presence. She was no longer the abandoned wife from 5 years ago. 5 years after Amelia left, Ethan Cole's world had also changed. On the surface, he was more successful than ever. Cole Holdings had expanded, becoming a dominant force in the business world. He was colder, more decisive, and more alone. The luxurious penthouse was still his solitary refuge. He never remarried, never had another serious relationship. The affair with Jessica Vance had ended quickly and ugly, leaving him with an expensive lesson and a deep-seated disgust for superficial relationships. But beneath the surface, his empire was facing turbulent undercurrents. Competition was fierce, and a few poor decisions he had made in the past, fueled by his emotional instability, were beginning to have consequences. In the lavish boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. "Mr. Cole, if the situation with the New World project doesn't improve by next quarter, we'll be forced to pull our funding. The instability at Cole Holdings in recent years is a major concern for us," said Mr. Thompson, the representative for their largest investment partner, his voice sharp with dissatisfaction. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his face an impassive mask, but inside, he felt a weariness he had never known. He had been putting out fires like this for years. The meeting ended on a heavy note. He returned to his office, rubbing his throbbing temples. His assistant entered and placed a thick file on his desk. "Sir, here is the due diligence report on potential partners in the education sector you requested. It's a rapidly growing market, a new direction to diversify our investments. Ethan nodded indifferently, flipping through the file without interest. Education. He had no passion for it. He was just following the board's recommendation. His eyes scanned the company names, the complex financial charts, the dry figures, until one name made him freeze. Asterisk, the Sprout Hub Early Education Center. Asterisk. He paused, reading the report on this center more carefully. A surprisingly successful business model, rapid growth in just a few years, an outstanding reputation among New York's elite parents. And then his eyes locked on the line below the founder and director section. Asterisk, Amelia Ross. Asterisk. The file slipped from his hands, papers scattering across the floor. His entire body went rigid, the blood in his veins seeming to stop. The heart that had been quiet for 5 years suddenly began to pound furiously against his ribs. Amelia Ross. His Amelia. The woman who had vanished from his world like smoke, leaving no trace. For 5 years, he had used all his power and money to search for her, to no avail. He had thought she'd left the country, or that something terrible had happened. And now, her name had appeared before him in a business file, attached to a brilliant success story he knew nothing about. A whirlwind of emotions engulfed him. Stunned disbelief, then an irrational flicker of anger. How could she be so successful without him? But all of that was quickly drowned by a desperate, overwhelming wave of hope. She was here. She had been in New York all along. He hadn't completely lost her. And Mason, their son. How was he? Was he okay? "Get out!" he growled at his bewildered assistant. When he was alone, he sank to his knees, his hands trembling as he gathered the scattered pages. He devoured the report, not missing a single word. Tucked inside was a small magazine interview featuring a photo of her. It was small and a bit blurry, but he recognized her instantly. It was the same elegant face, but the innocence was gone, replaced by the confident, serene grace of a seasoned woman. The pain and regret he had tried to bury for 5 years erupted with violent force. He knew what he had to do. Failed projects, withdrawn investments, none of it mattered anymore. For 5 years, he had lived in a hell of his own making. Now, a fragile clue had appeared. He had to find her. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city he ruled, but all he could see was her face. He picked up his phone, his voice hoarse but resolute, as he gave an order to his most trusted assistant. Investigate everything about the Sprout Hub Education Center and its founder, Amelia Ross. I want an address and every available detail within the hour. With the address in hand, Ethan drove his luxury Maybach to the quiet neighborhood in Queens where Amelia lived. The expensive car looked utterly out of place among the small side streets and weathered apartment buildings. The stark contrast between his world and her current one sent a sharp pang of pain through his chest. He had promised to give her the best life, only to be the one who pushed her into a place like this. He parked on a side street and sat in the car for a long time, his heart pounding like a war drum. He had faced hundreds of high-stakes negotiations, billion-dollar deals, but he had never felt so nervous, so completely stripped of his confidence. He tried to rehearse what he would say, but his mind was a complete blank asterisk. Sorry? Please? Let me explain? Asterisk. All the words felt meaningless against the 5 long years of his absence. Finally, after nearly an hour of wrestling with himself, he got out of the car. He stood before the slightly rusted metal door of her apartment, took a deep breath, and raised his hand to knock. It felt as heavy as lead. It took another long moment before he found the courage to tap 3 times. The door opened, but the person behind it wasn't Amelia. It was a boy of about 10, tall and slim, with a bright, intelligent face. His eyes were large and dark, his nose was straight, and his thin, determined lips were an exact copy of his own. He looked just like Ethan, but his gaze held the clear, gentle quality of his mother's. It was Mason Cole, his son. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stood frozen, unable to utter a single word. The boy looked at the stranger standing before him, who was just staring without speaking, and politely tilted his head. "Excuse me, sir. Can I help you?" Asterisk, sir. Asterisk, the simple word was a knife straight to Ethan's heart. His son, his own flesh and blood, was calling him sir. He didn't recognize him. Pain and regret swelled in his throat, making it impossible to speak. He tried to form words, but his voice came out as a dry rasp. I'm looking for your mother. Is she home?" Hearing voices, Amelia walked out from the kitchen. The moment she saw Ethan, her entire body stiffened. The gentle expression she had worn for her son instantly hardened into a mask of ice. There was no surprise, no anger, just an exhausted, bottomless distance. She knew this day would come eventually. She gently placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "Mason, honey, why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Mommy has a guest." Mason nodded obediently, glancing one last time at the strange man before heading to his room. Once the bedroom door was closed, Amelia turned to face him. Her eyes were cold, her voice devoid of any emotion. "What are you doing here?" Ethan felt all the words he had prepared evaporate. In the face of her coldness, he was as flustered as a child caught in a lie. "Amy, I'm sorry. I've been looking for you for 5 years." A corner of Amelia's mouth lifted in a smile that was colder than ice. "Looking for me? Or did you just happen to read my name on some business report after 5 years and then decide to look?" Her astuteness stunned him. He couldn't believe she had guessed so accurately. He stammered, unable to hide his embarrassment. I just want to see my son. I want to make it up to both of you." Make it up? Those words ignited the fury Amelia had suppressed for 5 long years. "Ethan, what right do you have to say that? Where were you for the past 5 years? When our son had a 104-degree fever and had to be rushed to the emergency room in the middle of the night, where were you? When I was alone, caring for him while working myself to exhaustion just to pay the rent, where were you? When my son cried and asked why all his friends have dads but he doesn't, where were you? Do you think a simple 'I want to make it up to you' can erase those 5 years?" Each question was like a whip cracking against him. He stood there, unable to answer, unable to argue. He could only bow his head and accept her accusations, because everything she said was the truth. He looked up, his eyes filled with pain and desperation. "Then what should I do? Tell me, Amelia, what do I have to do for you and our son to forgive me?" Amelia looked deep into his eyes. She saw the regret, the torment, but her heart was no longer moved. "I don't need your forgiveness, and my son doesn't need a father who suddenly drops out of the sky." "Ethan, words are the cheapest thing in the world. If you're truly sorry, then stop talking." She paused, her voice becoming steel. "Prove it with your actions. But I'm telling you now, don't expect anything. And most importantly, do not disturb the quiet life my son and I have built." With that, she gave him no chance to say another word and decisively slammed the door in his face. Ethan was left standing alone in the shabby hallway, the cold finality of the closing door like a verdict, declaring that his journey to reclaim his family would be the longest, hardest road of atonement. He understood that to open that door again, he couldn't use money or power, but the entirety of his guilt-ridden heart. After that tense encounter, Ethan didn't dare show up unannounced again. Amelia's words had been a bucket of ice water, snapping him to his senses. Asterisk. "Prove it with your actions." Asterisk. The phrase echoed in his mind. He knew he couldn't be impulsive or use his usual overbearing tactics. He had lost that right. Now, all he had was patience. He started a new, secret routine. Every morning, he would wake up early and drive to Amelia's neighborhood, parking his car in a discreet spot down the street. He would just sit there, silently watching her walk Mason to school. He saw her gently stoop to fix the boy's collar, saw her warm smile as she listened to their son's chatter. These simple, everyday moments, things he had once taken for granted, were now a luxury he could only observe from a distance. His heart ached, yet he felt a strange sense of peace. At least he knew they were okay. He started to learn about Mason's life. He found out the boy loved a specific brand of strawberry yogurt sold at the convenience store near his school. The next day, Ethan went to the store, bought their entire stock, and paid the owner, asking him to give Mason a free yogurt every day, telling him it was a loyal customer promotion. He also learned that his son was obsessed with the superhero Ultraman. He spent an entire evening searching online and finally managed to order the latest limited edition figure from Japan. A few days later, the package arrived at Amelia's apartment with no return address, just a small note attached, for the bravest little hero. Amelia, of course, knew who was behind these things. At first, she was annoyed. Was he trying to buy their son's affection with money? But then she realized he never showed his face, never demanded recognition. He was doing everything quietly. She decided to remain silent, neither accepting nor returning the gifts, simply observing to see how long he would persist. One late autumn afternoon, the sky suddenly opened up in a torrential downpour, throwing the city streets into chaos. Ethan was sitting in his car near Mason's school, his stomach in knots. He saw Amelia running toward the school gate with only one small umbrella. Without hesitation, she held it entirely over their son, leaving one of her own shoulders completely exposed to the soaking rain as she struggled to hail a cab in the gridlocked traffic. The sight twisted his heart. Without a second thought, he bolted from his car, ran into a nearby store, and bought the largest, sturdiest umbrella he could find. He didn't dare bring it to her himself. He saw a young delivery guy taking shelter from the rain and ran over, pressing a large bill into his hand. "Excuse me, can you do me a favor? Please take this umbrella to the mother and son standing over there. Just say a kind stranger sent it. Don't say anything else." The delivery guy, though surprised, quickly agreed. Just as Amelia was getting desperate, a young man ran up and handed her a large umbrella. "Ma'am, someone asked me to give this to you," he said, and rushed off. Amelia was stunned. She held the umbrella, looking around, trying to find a familiar face in the crowd, but saw no one. She looked at the high-quality umbrella in her hands, then at her son, dry and safe beside her. Finally, she opened it, shielding them both from the rain. From his car, Ethan watched their figures disappear down the street under the new umbrella. He felt a mix of sorrow and a tiny spark of joy. He had been able to do something for them, even if it was something so small. That evening, Amelia placed the new umbrella next to the Ultraman figure. She stood looking at them for a long time. She knew it was him. The initial annoyance had faded, replaced by a complex, indescribable feeling. He wasn't storming into her life, not demanding or forcing anything. He was just quietly, somewhere, using his own clumsy methods to show he cared. The wall of ice she had built around her heart was still solid, but perhaps, after that afternoon's rain, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack had appeared. Ethan's quiet efforts, though unacknowledged, did not go unnoticed by Amelia Ross. She knew who paid for Mason's yogurts, who sent the limited edition action figure. His persistence was vexing, but it also stirred a complex emotion within her. He wasn't making a scene or demanding entry into their lives. He was just quietly existing on the periphery, using clumsy gestures to mark his presence. The turning point came one evening. As Amelia was checking her son's homework, Mason hesitated before speaking. "Mom, I saw that man again today at the school gate, the one who gave you the umbrella. He just looked at me from far away and smiled. I wanted to thank him." Amelia's heart fluttered. She looked at her son and saw in his clear eyes a mix of curiosity and a hint of longing. She had always told herself she had to keep Ethan away from their lives, but perhaps she couldn't deny Mason the right to know his own father. Even if she could never forgive Ethan, Mason was innocent. He deserved an answer. After a long, restless night, she picked up her phone and sent a short text to the number she had never deleted. *Sunday, 3 p.m., Central Park. Just 1 hour. Ethan received the text in the middle of a tense meeting. He almost couldn't believe his eyes. He read the short line a dozen times, so much so that his assistant had to clear his throat to get his attention. He immediately declared the meeting over, leaving everyone in stunned silence. For the next 2 days, he was in a state of delirious joy and crippling anxiety. He prepared countless gifts, from expensive toys to elaborate outing plans, only to discard them all. He realized what he needed wasn't to impress, but to be sincere. On Sunday, he arrived at Central Park at 2 p.m. He wore simple, casual clothes, shedding the aloof aura of a CEO. When he saw Amelia and Mason approaching from a distance, his heart felt like it would leap out of his chest. Amelia maintained a cool, distant expression. She chose a bench under a large tree, sat down, and opened a book, a clear signal that she was only there as a supervisor. The focus was on the meeting between two males, one large and one small. Ethan walked over and slowly knelt on one knee to be at eye level with his son. His voice was hoarse with emotion. "Hi, Mason. I'm an old friend of your mom's." Mason looked at him without blinking, unafraid, only purely curious. "Are you the one who sent me the Ultraman figure?" A smile, both joyful and pained, touched Ethan's lips. "Yes, that was me." The conversation started awkwardly, but the innocence of a child quickly broke the tension. "Hey, let's play frisbee," Mason suggested, pointing to a blue plastic disc he had brought. Ethan agreed instantly. He took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and started playing with his son. He hadn't run like this in years. He ran, he jumped, he laughed. He was clumsy and uncoordinated, dropping the frisbee more than once, which sent Mason into fits of giggles. The sound of his son's clear, carefree laughter was the most beautiful music he had heard in 5 years. From her bench, Amelia looked up from her book. She saw the scene, a tall man in casual clothes chasing after a young boy, both of them laughing under the golden afternoon sun. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat. This image had once been her simplest dream of a family. After they were tired, father and son sat on the grass. Mason started asking a million questions. "What's your job?" "I work in an office." "Do you like chocolate ice cream?" "Mom says if I eat too much, I'll get cavities." "I love it, but your mom is right." Ethan patiently answered every question. He listened as Mason talked about his friends, his teacher, his dream of becoming a scientist. In that short hour, he felt alive again. He was getting a glimpse into his son's world, a world he had missed for 5 years. The time passed too quickly. Amelia stood up and checked her watch, a clear signal that the hour was up. The joy in Ethan's eyes faded. Mason looked disappointed too. "Mister?" The boy looked up and asked, "Will you play with me again next time?" His son's innocent question was like a jolt of electricity, sparking a powerful hope in Ethan's heart. He smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. Of course. He watched them walk away until their figures disappeared among the trees. He remained standing alone in the park, the frisbee still in his hand. It was only an hour, but to him it was more precious than anything. This wasn't forgiveness, he knew that, but it was a start. The very first step on the long, difficult road to reclaiming what he had lost. After the meeting in the park, a subtle shift occurred. Amelia no longer imposed a total ban. Occasionally, on weekends, she would allow Ethan to take Mason to the bookstore or a museum, though always under her distant supervision. He was always perfectly behaved, never crossing the boundaries she had set. A fragile, tentative routine began to form. Amelia maintained her cold exterior, but inside she was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. She saw that her son was happier, more open, whenever he was with Ethan. This brought her both relief and a pang of pain. A few weeks later, on a Saturday evening, Ethan brought Mason home after a movie. The boy had fallen asleep in the car. He carried him up to the apartment. As he gently laid Mason in bed, Amelia was about to see him out when a sudden thunderstorm broke outside. Lightning split the sky, and rain poured down in sheets. Looking at him standing there, perhaps out of pity, or for a reason she herself couldn't define, Amelia heard herself say, "The rain is too heavy. You can stay for a while, wait for it to let up." She went to the kitchen and made him a cup of hot tea, placing it on the small coffee table. It was the first time in 5 years they had been alone together in a quiet space like this. The air in the small living room became thick with all the things left unsaid. Ethan took the cup, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. He looked at the woman sitting across from him. She was still beautiful, but her beauty was distant, like an impenetrable wall of ice. He knew that if he couldn't break down this wall, he would never have a chance. He knew this was the moment he had to tell the truth. He took a deep breath, his voice low and raspy with 5 years of torment. "Amelia, there's something I have to tell you. About that day, the day you came to my office." At his words, Amelia's whole body tensed. Her hand, holding her own teacup, tightened instinctively. It was a wound she never wanted to touch again. Seeing her expression, Ethan knew he couldn't hesitate. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze no longer evasive, filled with painful honesty. That afternoon, between me and Jessica, nothing actually happened. Amelia was stunned, barely able to process what she had just heard. She stared at him, her eyes wide. What did you say?" "It was a trap," he continued, his voice bitter. "She set it all up. That day, she put something in my drink at a business lunch. I felt dizzy and exhausted, so I went back to the office to rest. She was the one who took me there and staged that scene. The kiss, she initiated it. I wasn't fully conscious." He paused, his voice cracking. "She knew you were coming. She planned everything." Amelia sat motionless, her mind a blank. A trap? A setup? But then a wave of anger surged through her, overwhelming her shock. "Then why?" she almost shouted. "Why didn't you say anything back then? Why were you silent?" This was the hardest part. Ethan bowed his head, his voice filled with self-loathing. "Because I was a coward. After you left, I knew it was a setup, but I didn't have the courage to chase after you and explain. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. I was afraid you would think I was just making excuses for my guilt. I was afraid you'd find out I was foolish enough to be manipulated by another woman. I was afraid you would despise me." He looked up, his red-rimmed eyes filled with utter agony. "And most of all, Amelia. I have to admit that even though nothing physical happened that day, in my mind, I had already betrayed you. My heart was no longer completely yours. I had a crush on her, and because of that, I felt I had no right to explain, no right to ask you to stay. Asterisk, crash. Asterisk." The teacup fell from Amelia's hand, shattering on the floor into 1,000 pieces, just like her heart at that moment. Her whole body trembled. The tears she had held back for 5 years finally broke free, streaming down her face like the rain outside. But these were not tears of weakness or sadness. They were tears of rage. Rage at Jessica's cruelty, but 1,000 times more rage at his cowardice. "Do you have any idea," her voice trembled, breaking, "what my life has been like for the past 5 years? I had to live with that image, that pain, that humiliation, every single day. I told myself I had to be strong, I had to hate you, just to survive. But all of it was built on a misunderstanding, on a lie you couldn't be bothered to correct. Your cowardice was crueler than any betrayal, Ethan. Do you know that?" She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. Ethan sat there, paralyzed. He wanted to reach out, to hold her, to comfort her, but he knew he had lost that right. He could only watch her cry, watch the pain his silence had caused her for 5 years finally erupt. He knew this truth, instead of healing, had just ripped her old wound open again, deeper and more painfully than before. That night, after Ethan left, Amelia sat alone in the living room for a long time. The broken pieces of the teacup had been swept away, but the shattered pieces of the truth still littered her mind, sharp and painful. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside her had just begun. She barely slept. His confession echoed in her head. No physical betrayal, it was all a staged play. The woman she had hated for 5 years was just a cruel puppeteer, and the husband she thought had stabbed her in the back was just a coward who couldn't face the truth. The next morning, she woke up with an exhausted body and a tormented heart. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back had swollen eyes and a weary, confused expression. Who was she? The cheated, abandoned wife? Or the wife who left over a misunderstanding? The wife who hadn't given her husband a chance to explain? The very nature of her pain had changed. Before, it was a clear-cut pain, a righteous anger toward a betrayer. That pain, as harsh as it was, had given her the strength to leave, to rebuild her life. She hated him, and that hatred became the fuel for her survival and success. But now? Her enemy was no longer so clear. She despised Jessica Vance for her venomous scheme, but a larger, more complicated anger was reserved for Ethan, not because he had an affair, but because of his weakness and his silence. He had let her live in torment for 5 years. He had let her endure the humiliation and hurt alone, just to protect his own fragile ego and a man's pride. In her eyes, that cowardice was a deeper, more cruel betrayal. It showed that in his heart, his own image was more important than her feelings. She stumbled into the kitchen and made a coffee, but its bitterness was nothing compared to the bitterness in her soul. Her mind replayed the past 5 years, the lonely nights she cried herself to sleep, the difficult days she scrimped and saved to provide for her son, the times she had to swallow her tears and invent excuses to answer her son's questions about his absent father. She had gone through all of it, thinking she was the victim of an affair. Now, she just felt like a fool, a pawn in a game she never knew was being played. The strength she had built, the independence she was so proud of, suddenly felt fragile. Its very foundation was built on a distorted truth. A part of her felt relieved at least he hadn't slept with that woman, but another, much larger part of her felt disgusted. The betrayal in thought, the momentary infatuation, and above all, the 5 years of silence. He had allowed a misunderstanding to corrode their marriage, to corrode her youth and her trust. He hadn't given her the choice, the right to know the truth and decide for herself whether to stay or go. He had made the decision for her with his silence. Mason woke up and found his mother sitting listlessly at the kitchen table. He ran to her, worried. "Mommy, your eyes are all red. Did you cry last night? Is something wrong?" Amelia snapped out of her trance and hugged him tightly. "It's nothing, sweetie. Mommy just had a little trouble sleeping." She couldn't explain the chaotic mess of adult emotions to her son. The world she had tried so hard to shield him from was once again in turmoil. What was she supposed to do now? Did this new truth change anything? Was cowardice more forgivable than betrayal? She didn't know. The wall of ice she had built around herself had been strong because it was built on a simple, painful truth. But now that this truth was proven false, the wall was beginning to crack. She didn't know if she should let it crumble, or if she should use the cement of resentment and disappointment to build it back up, taller and stronger than before. That day, she went to the Sprout Hub as usual. This place was her accomplishment, her pride. Watching the children play, seeing her dedicated staff at work, she felt a temporary calm. She had found her peace here. But his confession was a storm from the past, threatening to sweep away the tranquility she had worked so hard to achieve. Her heart was a tangled mess, and she had no idea which path to take next. That afternoon, the main lobby of the Sprout Hub was bustling. Parents were arriving to pick up their children, and the air was filled with cheerful chatter and the happy sounds of kids, creating a warm, vibrant scene. Amelia was standing at the reception desk, smiling and exchanging a few words with some of the parents. She had managed to temporarily shelve her chaotic emotions, putting on the calm, professional demeanor of the center's director. Suddenly, the glass doors swung open and a woman walked in. She was wearing the latest designer dress, with large sunglasses covering half her face, and her high heels clicked provocatively on the polished floor. Her entire aura was completely out of place in this wholesome environment. Amelia's heart stopped for a beat. 5 years had passed, but she recognized her instantly. Jessica Vance. All activity in the lobby seemed to halt. Parents and staff alike turned to stare at the newcomer. Jessica took off her sunglasses, revealing sharply made-up eyes and a malicious smirk. She ignored the receptionist who was about to approach her and walked straight toward Amelia. Amelia Ross. "Long time no see." Her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "You haven't changed a bit. Still got that holier-than-thou look, but just as pathetic on the inside." Amelia's face went cold, but her voice remained calm. "Miss Vance, this is an education center for children, not a stage for your dramatics. If you have no business here, please leave." Jessica let out a theatrical laugh. "Dramatics? Oh, the best part of the show is yet to come." She shifted slightly to the side. From behind her, a little boy of about 4 or 5 stepped out. He seemed shy, clutching tightly to Jessica's dress. But what made Amelia freeze was the child's face. The large, dark eyes, and especially the stubbornly pursed lips. He looked astonishingly like Ethan. Jessica bent down and stroked the boy's hair, but her eyes were locked on Amelia, her voice sweet as poison. "Let me introduce you. This is Leo. He's Ethan Cole's son. Come on, Leo. Say hello to Miss Ross." It was as if a bomb had just been detonated in the lobby. A dead silence fell over the room. The parents began to whisper amongst themselves. All eyes, curious, pitying, contemptuous, were fixed on Amelia. Her head was spinning. Ethan's son? Was his confession last night a lie, or was this another elaborate act? But the child, he looked so much like him. 1,000 questions and 1,000,000 doubts swirled around her, making it hard to breathe. But her instincts as a mother and a leader kicked in, helping her cling to the last shreds of her composure. She couldn't let this scene affect the innocent children here. She turned to a teacher standing nearby, her voice firm. "Miss Peterson, please take the remaining children to the reading room, and would all parents please wait in the lounge for a few minutes? I need to handle a personal matter." The staff moved quickly. The lobby emptied out, leaving only Amelia and Jessica with the boy. When there was no longer an audience, Amelia turned back to face her nemesis, her voice so cold it could freeze bone. "What do you want?" Jessica smiled triumphantly, savoring the chaos she had created. "What do I want? Nothing much. I just came here to let you know, to let everyone know, that you weren't the only one, that the man you tried so desperately to hold on to had another family on the side." She bent down and hugged the boy, continuing her act as a wronged mother. "I don't need a title. I just want justice for my son. He deserves a father. He has a right to his family." Every word Jessica spoke was like an invisible knife, stabbing at the dignity and peace Amelia had fought so hard to build. Her world was once again pushed to the brink of collapse. After Jessica Vance left, a strange silence descended upon the lobby of the Sprout Hub. The whispers had stopped, but the pitying, curious stares remained fixed on Amelia Ross. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She calmly reassured her staff, arranged for the remaining parents to pick up their children, and then retreated to her office, closing the door firmly behind her. The world she had painstakingly built was under threat, the reputation of her center, and more importantly, the peace of her son. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Ethan's tearful confession and the image of a child who looked exactly like him, which was the truth? Or were they both part of a more elaborate lie? Her heart was numb with pain. Doubt gnawed at her mind once more. In her desperation, she did something she never thought she would do again. She called him. The phone was answered almost instantly, as if he had been waiting. "Amelia?" Jessica Vance was here. Her voice was cold and distant. "She brought a little boy. She said he's your son." She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a heavy silence. Then his voice, urgent and furious. "She's lying, Amelia. You have to believe me. It was completely over between us 5 years ago. I don't know anything about that child." Asterisk, believe me. Asterisk, Amelia laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I believed you once, Ethan. The result was 5 years of living in a misunderstanding created by your own cowardice. What am I supposed to believe now?" Without waiting for a reply, she hung up. She didn't want to hear any more explanations. His words had lost all value. Meanwhile, on the other end of the line, Ethan felt his blood boil. Jessica. It was her again. She still wouldn't let go. Still insisted on using the filthiest tricks to destroy his life, to extinguish the fragile spark of hope he had just found. Hearing the pain and doubt in Amelia's voice, Ethan knew that no amount of swearing or pleading would work now. His past silence had completely destroyed his credibility. This time, he couldn't be a coward. He had to act, decisively and definitively. The very next day, he had his secretary summon Jessica Vance to his office. Not a private meeting, but an official one, with his lawyer present. Jessica walked in confidently. She assumed Ethan had called her to negotiate. She had her demands ready, certain that the child was her trump card. "Well, well, CEO Cole," she said, crossing her legs, her tone mocking. "Finally ready to face your responsibilities as a father?" Ethan didn't get angry. He leaned back in his chair, hands steepled on the desk, his face like ice, his sharp gaze fixed on her. "Jessica, I don't have time for your games. I've called you here today to give you 2 choices." His attitude took her by surprise. "Oh?" "1," he said, his voice even but heavy with authority. "You and the boy will immediately take a DNA test with me. I will cover all costs. If the results show he is my son, I will fulfill all my financial obligations as a father. He will want for nothing. But you and he are to never, ever appear before or interfere in the lives of Amelia Ross and her son again. He paused, his gaze turning dangerous. 2. You refuse, and I will use every legal means at my disposal to force a test. And if the results show he is not my son, he gave a cold smile, then you had better be prepared to face charges for slander, fraud, and extortion. You know I can do it. The smug smile on Jessica's face froze. Her plan had been to use emotion and responsibility to pressure him, to make him negotiate. She never expected him to be so calm, so ruthless, directly issuing an ultimatum. She tried to play the victim. You don't believe me? Her eyes welled with tears. After everything I sacrificed for you, you doubt your own son? I don't believe times you asterisk, Ethan cut her off coldly. I was foolish enough to believe you once, and the price was 5 years of hell. I will not make that mistake again. Choose. His voice held no hesitation, his eyes no escape. Jessica was cornered. She looked at Ethan's emotionless face, then at the silent lawyer beside him. She knew her performance was over. Her face went pale. Her red lips trembled, and finally, she whispered, "Fine. I agree." The days waiting for the DNA test results were the longest and heaviest of his life. Ethan had informed Amelia of the confrontation and his decision. She said nothing, just listened in silence. But her silence was no longer one of absolute distance. It was a silence of waiting. She was giving him one last chance to prove his words. The fate of their fragile relationship now rested on a piece of paper. Ethan used his connections to expedite the process. 3 days later, the lab called to say the results were ready. That afternoon, in the waiting room of a high-end private medical facility, the air was thick with tension. Ethan sat with a cold, blank expression, but his tightly clenched hands betrayed his anxiety. Jessica was there too, trying to maintain the calm facade of a wronged mother, but her darting eyes and fidgeting hands gave her away. Amelia had come as well. She didn't sit, but leaned against a wall in the corner, a silent observer. She had to witness the truth for herself, whatever it might be. She needed a definitive end to all of this. The door opened and a middle-aged doctor in a white coat walked in, holding a sealed envelope. All 3 of them held their breath. "We have the results of the paternity test between Mr. Ethan Cole and the boy, Leo Vance," the doctor said in a professional, emotionless tone. Ethan stood and walked over, his hand steady as he took the envelope. He didn't open it right away. He glanced at Amelia, as if drawing strength from her presence. Then he turned to Jessica with an icy stare. Finally, he took a deep breath and decisively tore open the seal. He pulled out the paper, scanned past the technical data, and his eyes landed on the final conclusion. The tension in his face eased. He let out a quiet sigh, a breath of relief heavy with the weight of the past 5 years. Jessica couldn't wait any longer. She lunged forward and snatched the paper from his hand. Her eyes widened as she read the conclusion. Asterisk. Based on the analysis, Ethan Cole is excluded as the biological father of Leo Vance. The probability of exclusion is 99.999%. Asterisk. "No!" Jessica shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. "This is impossible. There must be a mistake. Your machines are broken, or you did this." She whirled on Ethan. "You bribed them, didn't you?" Her pathetic mask shattered completely, revealing a face twisted with madness and defeat. Ethan didn't even bother to look at her. He turned to the doctor and said politely, "Thank you, doctor. I appreciate your time." Then he turned to Amelia. His eyes were now filled with relief, remorse, and a silent plea. His voice was softer than ever before. "Amelia, let's go home." As they turned to leave, Jessica collapsed into a chair, sobbing hysterically. Her final, desperate act had failed spectacularly. She was left alone in the sterile white room with her lies and her shattered ambitions. Ethan and Amelia walked out of the medical center together. Under the bright afternoon sun, neither of them spoke. The truth had been revealed, the lie exposed. A great weight had finally been lifted from both of their hearts. But the silence between them now was not peaceful. It was the silence of exhaustion, of relief, and of a great, unanswered question hanging in the air. What now? The drive from the medical center to Amelia's apartment building seemed longer than usual. The luxury Maybach glided through the city in near total silence. But this silence was different from the tense, angry silences of the past. This was the silence of exhaustion, the quiet after a great storm has passed, leaving behind a still, empty space filled with unspoken emotions. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He felt as if an invisible weight he had carried for 5 years had finally been lifted. He had been vindicated at least from the most recent, most venomous lie. He wasn't a man who had fathered a child in secret. He hadn't deceived her in such a brazen way. He glanced at the woman beside him. Amelia was staring out the window, her head resting against the glass. Her face was unreadable, not happy, not relieved. He couldn't tell what she was thinking. He wanted to say something, to break the silence, but what could he say? See? I told you so. That sounded arrogant and foolish. I'm sorry you had to go through that. That felt hollow and weak. He realized a bitter truth. The DNA test proved his innocence in one matter, but it couldn't erase his greatest sin, the sin of cowardice and silence 5 years ago. It was his silence that had created fertile ground for Jessica's lies to grow, causing Amelia yet another round of pain. The joy of his relief was quickly overshadowed by a deep, persistent guilt. For Amelia, her mind was like a calm lake after a hurricane. It was over. Jessica's drama had reached its finale. The whispers and stares she might have to face at her center now had a definitive answer. A part of her couldn't deny the feeling of relief. The man beside her, though once foolish and weak, was not, at least, a pathological liar. But that relief didn't translate into joy or forgiveness. It simply removed one lie, only to expose the original, deepest wound. For 5 years, she had lived in torment because of a twisted truth. For 5 years, she had forced herself to be strong, relying on hatred to survive. The piece of paper couldn't erase those 5 years. It only proved Jessica's cruelty and Ethan's past foolishness. It did nothing to absolve his failure as a husband. She felt tired, an exhaustion that was both physical and spiritual. She was tired of the drama, the lies, the emotional turmoil. All she wanted was peace. The car stopped in front of her building. The silence inside grew even thicker. This was a crossroads. After today, where would their relationship go? Would this truth change anything? Just before she opened the car door, Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Amelia, thank you." She turned to him, slightly surprised. "Thank you," he repeated, "for coming with me today." He wasn't thanking her for believing him. He knew she hadn't. He was thanking her for giving him the chance to prove it, for being willing to face the truth, even if it might hurt her again. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. For the first time, she didn't just see a powerful CEO or a remorseful ex-husband. She saw a man who looked incredibly tired and wounded. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You should get some rest, too." Her voice was no longer icy, but it wasn't warm either. It was just neutral, devoid of emotion. With that, she opened the door, got out, and walked into the building without a single backward glance. Ethan sat in the car, watching her until she disappeared. The burden of the lie was gone, but the burden of the past remained. A fragile hope flickered within him, but he knew the road ahead was still long. The air between them was clearer, but the landscape of their relationship was still a ruin that needed to be rebuilt from scratch, if it could be rebuilt at all. A few days after the truth was revealed, life seemed to return to its normal rhythm. Ethan quickly and quietly used his influence to quash any potential rumors from the incident with Jessica, ensuring the reputation of the Sprout Hub remained untarnished. He did it all behind the scenes, without taking any credit. Feeling he had regained a sliver of trust, Ethan gathered his courage and called Amelia, saying he had something important to discuss. He wanted to see her alone in the evening, after Mason was asleep. After some hesitation, Amelia agreed. That night, he came to her apartment. It was the first time he had been formally invited inside since his tearful confession. The small apartment was simply decorated, but incredibly warm. Mason's colorful drawings were taped all over the refrigerator. A soft blanket was folded neatly on the sofa. The place radiated the feeling of a real home, a sanctuary he himself had shattered. The thought sent another wave of regret through him. Amelia made him a cup of tea and sat in the chair opposite him, maintaining a safe distance. She waited silently for him to speak. Ethan stood before her, not with his usual arrogant posture, but with the humble stance of a penitent. He had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times. He had to get it right. "Amelia," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I know these words are probably too late, and maybe they don't mean anything anymore, but I have to say them. I am sorry." He looked directly at her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I'm sorry for my stupidity and my momentary infatuation all those years ago. I'm sorry for my cowardice, for not telling you the truth from the very beginning. I'm sorry for letting you and Mason suffer so much for 5 years. I'm sorry for every tear you cried, for every lonely night you endured. He was about to continue, to promise to make it all up to her, to give her the world, to beg for a chance to start over, but Amelia raised her hand, signaling him to stop. Her face was calm, her voice clear and firm. "Ethan, I don't need your apology." He froze, stunned into silence. She looked him straight in the eye, each word deliberate. "An apology can't turn back time, it can't erase the scars. The reason I stood back up on my own 2 feet these past 5 years wasn't to wait for the day you'd show up and say you're sorry. I did it for Mason, and I did it for myself." She took a breath, her gaze unwavering. "What I need right now isn't a remorseful husband. I don't need any more promises. What I need, or rather, what Mason needs, is a father. A responsible, reliable, and stable father. You can visit him," she continued, drawing a clear line. "You can take him out. You can be a part of his upbringing and his life. That is your right, and it is his right. I won't stop you, but that's it. Our relationship, from now on, is as Mason's parents, working together for his sake. Nothing more." Her words were like a final verdict. There was no anger, no resentment, just clarity and resolution. She was closing the door on any possibility of a romantic reunion, at least for now. All of Ethan's grand plans to win her back with material things and dramatic gestures suddenly seemed ridiculous. He felt a profound disappointment, but mingled with it was an immense respect. The woman before him was no longer the gentle, dependent Amelia. She had become strong, rational, and she knew exactly what she wanted. He looked at her, truly saw her, and recognized the extraordinary person she had become through all the turmoil. He knew he had no right to ask for anything more. He nodded slowly, accepting her terms. "Okay," he said, his voice low. "I understand. I'll do exactly as you say. I will try to be a good father to Mason." The conversation had established a new boundary. It wasn't the reunion he had dreamed of, but it was more than he deserved. It was a fragile foundation upon which something new could possibly be built. When he left her apartment that night, he had a clearer purpose. His goal was no longer to win her back at all costs, but to earn a place in his son's life. And maybe, just maybe, one day in the distant future, he could earn back her respect. Several months passed. A new, fragile but stable equilibrium was established. Ethan kept his promise. He became a dedicated father, visiting Mason every weekend, taking him to games, patiently helping with his homework. He completely respected the boundaries Amelia had set, never once bringing up their past or overstepping his role. As for Amelia, after the emotional storm subsided, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The Sprout Hub was thriving under the management team she had trained, allowing her to take more time for herself. And in that time, an old passion, a flame she thought had been extinguished, began to rekindle. Her love for interior design. Before her marriage, she had been a talented and ambitious design student, but marriage and motherhood had forced her to put her dreams on hold. Now, she realized that while running her center brought her success and meaning, it was the act of creation, of sketching on blank pages, that was her true calling. She wanted to prove something, not to anyone else, but to herself. She wasn't just Mason's mother or Ethan's ex-wife. She was Amelia Ross, a designer. One evening, browsing online, she saw an announcement for the New York Design Star competition, a prestigious annual award in the architecture and interior design world. This year's theme was Designing a Community Cultural Space for Children. The grand prize was not just a large sum of money, but a contract to bring the winning design to life. Her heart pounded. This was it. In the following nights, after Mason was asleep, the lights in her small apartment burned late. She immersed herself in her work sketches, 3D models, ideas flowing endlessly. She felt alive, whole. Every line, every color, every material she chose was infused with her passion and her experience as a mother and an educator. Her design wasn't just a beautiful space, it was a space with a soul, a place to nurture creativity and heal. One weekend, when Ethan came to pick up Mason, he saw her engrossed in her blueprints. He glanced at her drawings, and astonishment filled his eyes. He had always known she was talented, but he never realized the depth and uniqueness of her vision. "Are you entering the Design Star competition?" he asked. Amelia nodded without looking up. "That competition is incredibly tough," he said, hesitating slightly. "Most of the finalists are from major firms or have powerful backers. The judges are all big names in the industry. I know a few people on the organizing committee. If you need, I can help." "No, thank you." Amelia cut him off, her voice firm but not harsh. She looked up at him. "Thank you for the offer, but I want to do this on my own. Whatever the outcome, I want it to be my own achievement, based on my own abilities." Her direct refusal left Ethan feeling a pang of disappointment, but it was quickly replaced by a profound respect. He saw in her eyes a burning flame of confidence and self-worth. She didn't need his protection anymore. She was building her own kingdom. He nodded slowly. "I understand. Good luck." Meanwhile, at the preliminary judging session, the mood was lackluster. Hundreds of portfolios had been submitted, most from well-known firms with safe, familiar styles. Alex Ryder, a brilliant young architect and this year's special guest judge, was flipping through the portfolios with a hint of boredom. He was known for his minimalist yet soulful style and his incredibly discerning eye. Suddenly, he stopped at one portfolio. It didn't have a big corporate name behind it, just an individual's. Amelia Ross, independent designer. What caught his eye wasn't the unfamiliar name, but the designs themselves. They were completely different. The space she created was modern yet warm, filled with light and soft curves. Her use of materials, her zoning of functions, it all showed a deep understanding of child psychology. It wasn't a project meant to show off technical skill. It was a space created from love. An older judge next to him glanced over. An independent designer? Never heard of her. Probably just an amateur trying her luck. Alex Ryder didn't reply immediately. He studied every detail of the drawings, then smiled faintly. "I wouldn't be so sure. Sometimes the greatest talents aren't found in the biggest buildings. This design has something most of the others lack. A soul." With that, he decisively placed Amelia Ross's portfolio into the pile for the semifinals, ignoring the other judges' surprised look. He was genuinely curious about the woman behind these emotionally resonant drawings. The New York Design Star Award ceremony was held at one of the city's most luxurious five-star hotels. The grand ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, filled with the biggest names in architecture and design. The atmosphere was formal, tinged with an undercurrent of fierce competition. Amelia Ross sat in the finalists section. She wore a simple yet exquisitely tailored white gown that highlighted her elegant, calm demeanor. Compared to the famous designers around her, she was a complete unknown. She was nervous, but also peaceful. Just making it this far was an incredible validation. In a less conspicuous corner of the audience, Ethan Cole sat alone. He had asked Amelia for permission to attend, to support her, and after a moment's hesitation, she hadn't said no. He watched her sitting in the center section, under the stage lights. She looked confident and radiant in a way he hadn't seen in a very long time. His heart swelled with a mixture of immense pride and profound loss. That brilliant, shining woman had once been his. The ceremony began. After the requisite speeches, the host started announcing the smaller awards. The tension in the room mounted. Finally, it was time for the most anticipated category, the grand prize for creative design. And now, the 5 final nominees for our most prestigious honor, the host's voice boomed. The names of major design firms were called out to thunderous applause. And, in a remarkable achievement, independent designer Miss Amelia Ross. Amelia's heart leaped. It still felt like a dream. The host opened the final envelope, a wide smile on his face. This is truly a surprising and well-deserved result. The winner of this year's grand prize for creative design is a brand new name who has won over the entire panel of judges with her exceptional talent. Congratulations to independent designer Miss Amelia Ross. The hall erupted. All eyes turned to her. Amelia was in total shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It wasn't until the person next to her nudged her that she snapped out of it. She slowly rose to her feet, and to the sound of roaring applause, walked toward the stage as if in a daze. The spotlight found her. In that moment, she was the center of the universe. She accepted the heavy, prestigious trophy, her hands trembling slightly. She stepped up to the podium and took a deep breath. Thank you. Thank you so much to the judges for believing in an unknown designer like me. Her voice was clear and steady. I want to dedicate this award to my son, Mason Cole. He is my greatest motivation, my endless source of inspiration. Thank you, my sweet boy. Mommy loves you. From the audience, Ethan watched her on stage, beautiful and brilliant. A warm current flowed through him, tinged with a nameless sorrow. After the ceremony, Amelia was surrounded by people congratulating her and exchanging business cards. In the midst of the crowd, a tall, elegant man with a scholarly air approached her. Congratulations, Miss Ross. I'm Alex Ryder, he smiled, a warm and sincere smile. I was one of the judges. Your design is truly outstanding. It's not just beautiful, it has a soul. I was incredibly impressed. Amelia was starstruck, being praised by the famous architect she so admired. Thank you, Mr. Ryder. That's a huge honor. I hope we'll have the chance to collaborate in the future, Alex Ryder said, handing her his card. Their conversation was brief and professional, but filled with mutual respect. Ethan watched it all from a distance. He saw the way Alex Ryder looked at Amelia, a look that held not just professional respect, but a spark of personal interest. He saw a man of his own caliber admiring the very talent in Amelia that he had once so carelessly overlooked. A sharp, unfamiliar pang of jealousy stabbed at him. He was proud of her success, but he also realized that this success was pulling her further and further away from his world, onto a bigger stage where she would meet many other excellent men. Amelia stood in the middle of the hall, holding her trophy, surrounded by accolades. The glow that had once been extinguished had returned, brighter than ever. Ethan stood in the shadows, watching her. He knew he had to let her shine, even if that light might never shine on him again. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. In a spacious, light-filled penthouse apartment with a minimalist yet exquisitely tasteful design, Amelia Ross, wearing an apron, hummed a happy tune while preparing dinner. The delicious aroma filled the air. This was the home she had designed for herself, the fruit of her relentless hard work. After winning the Design Star Award, Amelia's career had skyrocketed. Her independent design studio was inundated with offers for major projects. She was no longer an unknown, but one of the most sought-after interior designers in the city, known for her unique style that blended modern aesthetics with a deep, humanistic warmth. The Sprout Hub continued to flourish under her trusted management team, allowing her to devote herself fully to her greatest passion. The door opened, and Alex Ryder walked in, holding a small bouquet of daisies. He smiled, seeing her in the kitchen, walked over, and wrapped his arms gently around her waist from behind, placing a soft kiss on her cheek. "What are you making that smells so amazing?" Amelia laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'm making sweet and sour pork, someone's favorite. In that case, I'm having 3 bowls of rice tonight," Alex said, then naturally rolled up his sleeves and started helping her wash vegetables. Their movements were easy and comfortable, filled with an unspoken affection and the effortless harmony of 2 people who considered each other family. Their relationship had begun with professional admiration. After the competition, Alex had sought her out to collaborate on a major architectural project. The more they worked together, the more he was captivated by her talent, her resilience, and the beautiful soul hidden behind her reserved exterior. He was never pushy. He was simply there for her as a trusted friend and colleague. He listened patiently, understood, and respected her past. He didn't try to replace anyone, but slowly healed the wounds in her heart with his sincerity and warmth. Gradually, his gentle persistence melted the ice around her heart, making her believe in love once more. Most importantly, he forged a wonderful relationship with Mason. Alex never tried to be a father figure. He became a big brother, a mentor. He played chess with Mason, discussed science projects, and patiently answered the tough questions of a boy on the cusp of his teenage years. Mason, initially reserved, grew to love and respect him, calling him Uncle Alex. The boy could feel the genuine, unconditional care Alex had for both of them. "Mom! Uncle Alex, I'm home!" Mason, now a tall 12-year-old, burst in, breaking the romantic mood. "Go wash your hands, dinner's almost ready," Amelia said cheerfully. Their dinner was a lively, warm affair. They talked about everything from Alex's new building project and Amelia's difficult clients to Mason's tough physics test. Laughter filled the apartment, a perfect picture of a happy, normal family. Ethan Cole continued to play his part. He faithfully picked Mason up on weekends. His relationship with Amelia was now one of polite civility between co-parents. He had met Alex a few times during drop-offs. He saw the happiness in Amelia's eyes when she was with him. He saw the sincere care Alex showed Mason. It hurt like hell, but he accepted it as the price he had to pay. He was genuinely grateful that his son had another good man in his life. Later that evening, after Mason had gone to his room to study, Amelia and Alex sat on the balcony. She rested her head on his shoulder, gazing at the glittering New York night. "Alex," she said softly. "Thank you. For being so patient, for waiting, and for showing me that happiness can be this simple." Alex Ryder said nothing, just tightened his arm around her. Their love wasn't a whirlwind of passion and drama. It was peaceful and steady, just like him. Amelia Ross had truly found her happiness. A flourishing career, a wonderful son, and a man who loved her with all the gentleness and respect in the world. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer ached. They were just a reminder of the extraordinary strength she had found within herself. Her smile now was one of complete contentment, free from the ghosts of old sorrows. The middle school auditorium was festooned with banners and flowers. The graduation ceremony was in full swing, packed with proud parents and excited students. On stage, the principal was announcing the final award. And representing the entire graduating class with a farewell address, our valedictorian, Mason Cole. Thunderous applause erupted. A tall, handsome young man in his graduation gown walked to the podium. He had his father's strong jawline and his mother's gentle, intelligent eyes. It was Mason. In the front row, Amelia Ross raised a hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears of pride and emotion. Alex Ryder, sitting beside her, gently took her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. He looked up at the stage, his own eyes shining with a joy as if he were watching his own son. They looked like a perfect, happy family. But in a shadowed corner at the very back of the auditorium, near an exit, a solitary figure stood watching, Ethan Cole. He had arrived early but had chosen not to sit up front. He didn't want to intrude on their complete family portrait. He just wanted to watch this important milestone in his son's life from a distance. He saw Mason on stage, confident and mature, and his heart swelled with pride. Then his gaze shifted to Amelia and Alex. They sat close together, the love between them palpable. The image was both beautiful and agonizing. He had accepted this reality. He had learned to live with his loss. True love, he had learned, wasn't about possessing someone at all costs. Sometimes it was about letting go so the person you love can be happy, and he knew Amelia's happiness was no longer with him. On stage, Mason began his speech, his voice clear and resonant. He thanked his teachers and friends. Then he looked toward his mother. "But the person I want to thank the most," his voice wavered slightly with emotion, "is my mom. Thank you for always being my rock, for always believing in me, for sacrificing everything for me. I also want to give a special thank you to Uncle Alex. Thank you for being such a great friend and mentor, for teaching me so much." He didn't mention his father's name, not out of hatred, but simply because in his daily life, his family was the people sitting in the front row. Ethan smiled, a bitter smile, but he didn't blame his son. He knew this was the consequence he had to bear. When the ceremony ended, people flooded the stage to offer congratulations. He saw Alex walk up and pull Mason into a big hug, clapping him on the back. He saw Amelia approach, her face radiant. The three of them stood together, laughing, a portrait of warmth that anyone would envy. Ethan didn't go up. He knew his presence would only make things awkward. He quietly turned and walked out of the auditorium. He took out his phone and typed a short, simple text message to his son. Asterisk. Congratulations on your graduation, son. Dad is so proud of you. Asterisk. He knew Mason would read it later. This was how he existed in his son's life now, a quiet, background presence. He walked out of the school gates and blended into the bustling New York crowd. A lonely figure, but one no longer tormented. He had found a strange peace in his own acceptance. He had lost the love of his life, but he hadn't lost everything. He still had his son's love, and that was the most precious connection of all. Elsewhere in the city, in her warm apartment, Amelia Ross was celebrating with her small family. She watched Alex serve Mason a piece of cake, saw the brilliant smile on her son's face, and a serene, contented smile of her own bloomed. She had weathered the storm, and now she was finally home. A happy place, a place where he was not needed.